I think Sparta would be the closest reflection of this crazy North Korean gamble. Everything by and for the armed forces. Well, not everything. Everything that Kim and his cronies don't take, logically. So the question is, where do so many reservists come from? Well, as you can imagine, it has a lot to do with compulsory military service. Because yes, in North Korea, there is military service. The service is compulsory. And don't imagine that we're talking about 6 months, a year, or at most 2, not at all. Hold on to your chair, because North Koreans have to serve 8 to 10 years of military service. Absolute madness. Now, as we said before, those they are sending to Russia are not exactly inexperienced recruits, not at all. And this brings us directly to one of the most important questions in this video. What exactly are the North Koreans sending to Putin, and what exactly is the risk involved in these shipments? Well, let's see. According to South Korean intelligence services, which in this matter are usually very accurate, a large number of the North Korean soldiers sent to Kursk are part of the North Korean Army's 11th Corps. This is a special forces unit, also known as Storm Corps, reasonably well trained and relatively well equipped, at least by North Korean standards.
While their combat capability may not be particularly high, these are units that, far from being kitted with antiquated Soviet and Chinese weapons, use the best equipment in Pyongyang's hands, including explosives, chemical and biological agents, reasonably good weapons and aircraft for paratroop deployment. In total, this unit could have between 40 and 80,000 troops, which is a considerable part of the nearly 200,000 soldiers that make up North Korea's special forces.
Although, naturally, we are talking about North Korea. There are real doubts about the training and combat capability of these troops. Mind you, we're talking about troops who've supposedly been trained to carry out all sorts of sabotage operations, infiltration, and the like. And that, of course, could be of help in attacking the Ukrainian defense lines in Kursk. Be that as it may, these units are the creme de la creme of Uncle Kim's Praetorian Guard. Well, it's believed that the mission of these soldiers in Kursk could be to carry out lightning attacks and infiltrations of the Ukrainian lines to finish breaking them and force them to return to their country. What's more, alongside these elite units, there are also believed to be North Korean engineering and logistics units, munitions support units, and even transport units. In other words, we're talking about a broad catalogue of services provided by what we may already know as the North Korean Mercenary and War Services Corporation. The price? We've already mentioned it, but let me say it again. Russia will be in charge of equipping, arming, and supplying them, and will also pay about $2,000 per soldier per month. Of this money, a very small part will go to the soldiers themselves, and the rest, almost all of it, will go to the empty coffers of Kim Jong-un's impoverished empire. Well, the risk is that if this strategy works and the North Koreans get results, Russia may end up asking Pyongyang to keep its troops inside Ukraine itself. Obviously, the Kremlin could use these military resources to reinforce its positions in the illegally annexed Ukrainian territories in the Donbass, as well as on the Kharkiv, Kherson, and Zaporizhia fronts. Visual politic community, this is a real and very serious risk that could involve an even more serious escalation than we've already seen. Pyongyang's move has made things between the two Koreas very tense in recent weeks.
North Korea has accused South Korea of flying drones into its capital. The drones allegedly scattered propaganda leaflets over Pyongyang in what the North described as a provocation that could lead to armed conflict and even war. Pyongyang said it had ordered border troops to be prepared to fire. South Korea, in turn, said it was ready to respond.
In recent weeks, both Koreas have been engaging in cross insults, threats, and even clearly provocative actions. For example, in recent days, North Korea has launched dozens of balloons loaded with anti-South Korean propaganda leaflets, and even balloons loaded with garbage that have landed in Seoul itself. The loudspeakers that both Koreas have on the border have also been reactivated to launch propaganda, music, or news, each following its own version of events.
Residents near South Korea's heavily fortified border with North Korea are pleading for help as relentless loudspeaker broadcasts from the north disrupt their lives.
For this reason, many analysts are pointing to the risk that North Korean involvement in the Ukrainian war is beginning to spark a proxy war on the Korean peninsula. This is something that could happen, particularly if South Korea eventually decides to send lethal weapons to Ukraine, which is a possibility that is starting to gain a lot of traction in Seoul. And why should South Koreans care about what happens in Ukraine? Well, they care a lot more than we might think at first glance. The North Korean deployment carries with it several rewards that Seoul is not amused by. We're talking about funding, combat experience, and military technology. And that's why South Korea is considering punishing the Kremlin by starting to deliver large quantities of military equipment to the Ukrainian military. Equipment they could use to decimate the very same North Korean soldiers sent to war, and also to warn the Russian top brass to not continue down that road. Here on Visual Politic, we've already told you recently how South Korea is becoming a formidable war machine. But be that as it may, North Korea is already sending soldiers to war. And the question is, when the time comes, what help could Russia count on? What exactly can this hermetic and impoverished country offer Moscow? What are the major North Korean military capabilities right now? Well, let's take a look.
The North Korean wildcard.
Let's be clear, the North Korean armed forces are neither the most powerful, nor the most modern, nor the most dangerous in the world. But of course, that does not mean we should treat them as a joke. You see, the thing is, when we talk about North Korea's military capabilities, we can make a division by the type of equipment. On the one hand, we have the nuclear and ballistic forces, which are basically the nuclear weapons they already have, including the hydrogen bomb and the missiles they're developing, from short-range devices to intercontinental missiles capable of attacking the United States itself. Then there are biological and chemical weapons, which are another type of weapon of mass destruction that Pyongyang has. Then we have conventional offensive weapons, and finally, military capabilities for the defense of North Korea's own territory. Well, we are going to talk to you about nuclear weapons and intercontinental missiles, because North Korea is obviously not going to give any of these to Russia. Among other reasons, because the Russians just don't need them. Nor is it likely that the North Koreans will ever deliver biological and chemical weapons to Moscow, because Russia already has its own, and not just a few. However, the last two, offensive forces and weapons for territorial defense, are capabilities that could end up being used in Ukraine. But what exactly are we talking about? Well, let's see. The war in Ukraine is turning out to be a war like the ones of yesteryear, the old-fashioned way. A war that is based, above all, on the intensive use of artillery. In the fighting between Russia and Ukraine, it's estimated that artillery causes approximately 80% of all casualties. In other words, artillery is absolutely key to understanding this conflict. And why am I telling you this? Well, because North Korea's conventional force is based mainly on artillery. Pyongyang is first and foremost an artillery power. And believe me, we're talking about completely disproportionate capabilities. To give you an idea, it's estimated that North Korea has between 10,000 and 15,000 artillery launchers of various types. It's a really substantial force, one of the largest in the world. In fact, we often talk only about nuclear weapons as a deterrent, but in a way, artillery is the real North Korean deterrent. The thing to understand is, North Korea follows a military doctrine that's very similar to that of the Soviet, and by extension the Russian one, and naturally that makes them a perfect partner for selling arms, ammunition, and soldiers to the Russian army. According to South Korean analysts, the North is believed to have a strategic ammunition stockpile of several tens of millions of 122, 130, and 152mm shells. And take note of this because several tens of millions would be enough to satisfy Russia's consumption of shells in the Ukrainian war for several years. Not to mention the at least 2,000 tanks, similar to the Soviet T-62, that the Juche tyranny has in its inventory. It's a very old model, but one that has long been used by Russia in Ukraine.
Russia uses T-62 tanks as self-propelled artillery in Ukraine.
For the time being, however, Russia doesn't seem to need more tanks. For now, it is pulling from its own inventory of antiquities. But if necessary, these are also weapons that it could buy from North Korea. In other words, as you can see, as well as hiring soldiers, Pyongyang has a wide range of conventional weapons. These are weapons and equipment that, although very old, could serve to maintain the Russian pressure on the various fronts in Ukraine for years and years. And Visual Politic community, this is a possibility that now, with the dispatch of North Korean troops to the front lines in the Kursk Oblast, has begun to make many military analysts' hairs stand on end. Now, as Murphy's Law dictates, if something can go wrong, it will go wrong. Well, in this case, it can go worse. North Korea also has significant territorial defense capabilities, such as anti-aircraft defense systems and coastal defenses. Well, as we've already discussed in several videos here on Visual Politic, in this war, drones and missiles have become absolutely crucial for both sides. At the same time, air defenses and electronic warfare are essential to both armies for protecting their weapons depots and their rear guard. In fact, one of the main targets of Ukrainian attacks are Russian air defenses.
Ukraine says it hit Russian air defense systems in occupied Crimea.
Visual Politic community, this is just one example, but the truth is that there are many Russian air defense systems that Ukraine has destroyed in recent months, and vice versa. Well, here too, the Red Koreans could serve as a lifeline for the Russians. You see, until now, North Korea's air and missile defenses have relied almost exclusively on very old Soviet systems, such as the S-75 and S-200. But since 2017, Pyongyang has been investing a lot of resources precisely in improving its anti-aircraft defense capabilities, a move from which Moscow could now benefit.
In 2017, the Pongai 5 long-range surface-to-air missile system entered service with capabilities that military analyses compare to the Russian S-300. Not many details are known about this system, but according to some leading South Korean military analysts, the missiles of this system can destroy aerial threats located within a radius of up to 100 kilometers away. They're also believed to have a relatively modern radar system and missiles with reasonably sophisticated guidance systems.
And that's not all. There's also an evolution of this system, the Pongai 6, which has been under testing since 2020, and which some consider comparable to the Russian S-400 system, which these days is considered one of the best anti-aircraft systems in the world. And so the risk is that North Korea could end up sending Russia some of its most modern equipment and weapons, including anti-aircraft systems. Because that way, apart from making money, you could also test the equipment in combat. The pact is as follows. I send you soldiers and weapons, and you transfer me money and technologies to improve mine. But that's precisely what is worrying the West, and especially South Korea. Because if Pyongyang receives data on the performance of its weapons in battle, as well as Russian technologies, the technological advantage of the South Korean armed forces could be significantly reduced. And that's precisely what explains headlines like this one.
South Korea calls North Korean troop deployment in Russia a threat to Seoul.
The question now is whether the South Koreans will ultimately consider this threat as sufficient reason to start sending lethal weapons to Ukraine. And pay attention, because in recent days there has been a lot of discussion on this issue in Seoul. And although there's no political agreement to do so, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol seems increasingly willing to take this step. Keep an eye on this, because Ukraine could in a way become a kind of theater of war between the two Koreas. At Visual Politic, we'll be closely following everything that is happening. But in the meantime, it's now your turn. Do you think North Korea will take its military aid to Russia even further? Could we see North Korean tanks and air defenses on the front lines? Could Pyongyang be a game changer in the evolution of the war in Ukraine? Well, we've asked you the questions, and we'd love to hear your answers. So leave us your opinions below in the comments, and let's start a debate. And of course, if you found this video interesting, don't forget to give it a like, and subscribe to Visual Politic if you haven't already done so. As always, thank you so very much for watching. All the best. I'll see you next time.